Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barwale. Today, another simulcast with This Comes Next. This topic is written down as reflecting on the dying days of the failed war on drugs. How will the US export the idea of legalization? Here I'm talking very specifically about cannabis, but my suspicion is that once cannabis becomes legalized federally, once the, what is it now, probably $15 to $18 billion, which is used exclusively in the demonization of cannabis, and obviously all the mechanisms of federally making it illegal and supporting all the state bureaucracies that make it illegal, eventually these things are going to come to pass, probably sometime within the next 8 to 16 years, as slowly state by state legalization takes effect where previously medical cannabis has been. Some of the states are actually moving directly to legalization, which I think is very curious because this will only build momentum. I reflect on the 1970s, I think 1976, 1972, Oregon, to a lesser extent California. A few of the western states picked up moderate decriminalization, moving towards legalization. But medical cannabis, through all its paradoxes, has been a means of addressing the criminalization of cannabis, or the criminal nature of cannabis in US law, and has progressively moved it to something which is legal in a number of states. Somewhat curiously, in California, while the voters voted to make it legal, the legislators are yet to legislate this, and the legislation that they've generated is so curious as to be almost, a recriminalization against what the voters voted for, although strikingly, the voters voted for 64 pages of legislation here, which in and of itself is not being enacted, begging the question what the voters actually voted for. I've gone through a lot of phases in my life associated with my perspective on the war on drugs, in particular cannabis. Where I'm from in Australia, cannabis was decriminalised when I was about 13 or 14, and in my own peer group, it created a very curious series of side effects that ultimately, because of the nature of the kind of depressive element and the vast quantity of youth unemployment, had some impact because it wasn't really well thought out in terms of how the legislation worked. It was just more laws. And as an adult, looking at this thing, particularly the role of medical cannabis and these kind of things, I've gone through various ebbs and flows. But my perspective is, if you are unauthoritarian, there's only one possibility in your viewpoint, and irrespective of the curious nature of the medical cannabis industry and now the legal industry in some states in the US, it is moving at a rate which means at some stage the federal government in the US is going to have to declare, just purely through the fact that not even a majority of the states, like probably by the time 40 to 45 states have medical and 30 odd have legal, which will probably occur somewhere between 8, maybe 12, 16 years away, this is the tipping point for the US associated with full legalization. And when they legalize cannabis, there are a wide variety of factors that are going to cause a majority of the world to heavily evaluate the role in which this propaganda war has been fought and the vast quantity of damage it has caused. The war on anything that is a stipulated war on something tends to be a means for some authoritarian force. The war on poverty is probably the only thing I can think of, although that's not a true war on anything, really. More like the creation of poverty. In any case, all these other wars on are a means of applying some authoritarian regiment to a civilization that has had far too much authoritarianism. Thank you very much. And what will happen when this tipping point occurs will be very, very interesting, because you will have a series of countries forced to re-evaluate. The US has been the number one spokesperson, the number one salesperson for the war on drugs. And the war on drugs has failed so distinctly. The only two groups that seem to be making serious money through this is organized crime and enforcement of a variety of forms. very curious. One of the things I really like about YouTube is that you can actually access folks who are not necessarily pioneers, but are long-time commercialization advocates. Let's just put it that way. Folks that have irked out and now created quite sizable financial empires through working around the variety of really curious legislation associated with cannabis. Many of these folk are in their 40s and 50s. There are some younger folk. A lot of them have more curious anecdotes associated with their roles. But what strikes me as interesting watching a variety of YouTube, and this is actually content created by these individuals, is a means of understanding what the normalization of cannabis actually looks like financially, legally, in terms of, you've got these magazines like Wine Spectator and things like that. I'm not a drinker, but I do appreciate, the savoring of wines and the wine industry in this light. We participate in the olive oil industry, which is I don't know what we'll call it, the teetotal equivalent to the wine industry in this part of the world. Well, olive oil and balsamic vinegar, in any case. So, looking at how the cannabis industry has just embraced this thing, like, having vintages and a wide variety of flavors and profiles and analyses and, cultivators that are characters in and of their own right. It's just really very strange that intoxicants have defined themselves in society in a broader sense. But more interestingly, the lack of really meaningful medical analysis based on the federal illegalization of cannabis. It's really very unfortunate that so little is known about this plant. It's all anecdotal, actually. If you start scratching the surface, if you start reading the papers and, listening to the folks on YouTube, a lot of it is just really very anecdotal. The complex nature of these chemicals and the interactions of these chemicals is, not well understood in any meaningful sense. Slowly but surely, the data is gathered, some things are understood, but the complexity and the lack of analytical background to this thing, in particular that a lot of these strains, these are plant strains, fundamentally plant varietals, are heavily involved with illegality. Like they have their origins in, large-scale cash crops, as opposed to, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult, really, to find any comparable plants. Tomatoes are esoteric, basil, these kind of things, corn, apples and peaches. Roses is probably the closest thing, actually, based on the number of rose podcasts that I've listened to. So, yeah, through this thing, normalization will come in a variety of very strange and interesting forms. And I do wonder, in 20 years' time, what will be taken up with the hours in school that was spent on drug misinformation in my education. Like, maybe they might actually learn mathematics. Maybe. Who knows? Biology, perhaps. It's going to be a very interesting time when the vast amount of time and energy isn't put into drug misinformation. And I think that's going to be one of the most curious aspects of the export of legalization that will occur, hopefully, sometime, as I say, in the next 8 to 16 years. Based on the tide, it's probably going to be closer to 8, based on the number of states that moved to legalization and medical use in the last election. Astonishing. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.